Now, with that being said, let's get after it and focus on pillar number 1, which is focusing on the logic of a workflow instead of specific tools. A mistake that I see people making all the time is they focus too much on the individual tools that we use in this line of work as automation consultants. They get really myopic about maybe what they build with or what they offer. It's like they'll go and they'll learn voice flow and all the nuances of it. And they'll be like, okay, I'm just going to build chatbots, or I'm just going to do this or that. And don't get me wrong, it's really helpful to understand the nuances of some of these different tools. And I personally have tools that I prefer using naturally. I mean, I use Airtable and Make.com and OpenAI constantly. And I recommend messing around and learning these tools too, but not just for the sake of being good with a given tool. Learning Make will teach you what an API is and how to use it. Learning Airtable will give you a practical hands-on understanding of what a relational database actually is and how it works. And obviously building with OpenAI will teach you how to build with AI and incorporate it into your automations and your products. If a client wants to use Zapier instead of Make because they already have a subscription, great. If they're using a CRM that we haven't heard of, whatever, it's all good. Instead of becoming super dogmatic and rigid, we want to focus a layer higher on where the real value creation happens with the logic. The structuring of a formula in Airtable or the syntax of an HTTP request, all that stuff is pretty easy and quick to learn. You'll be able to solve for that in real time once you've already closed a deal and started working for a client. And I know that it sounds a little bit daunting when you're just first starting to dive in. Maybe some of the vernacular that I just used is totally foreign. But if you are starting to feel overwhelmed, I guarantee that it's because you don't have a working understanding of the larger frameworks at play, like the ecosystem that these things exist within. Once you've built that understanding, all this stuff becomes so incredibly modular. And maybe you're a little more technical and you already understand exactly what I'm talking about. And you're like, okay, Josh, I get it. Let's move on. Deal. Let's move on. But before we do, I just want to call out one other thing, a sort of pro tip, if you will. Get comfortable reading API documentation. Again, this has nothing to do with programming or being a programmer. It's just a muscle that will allow us to make a certain binary distinction about what we are able to and not able to build. And this is so helpful, especially when clients get excited and just start throwing ideas at us. Now let's talk about pillar number 2, which is scoping your first project. One of the most compelling parts about this line of work, and one of the things I'm most proud of about Feeble, the agency that I started, is that our clients tend to stick around for, on average, between 6 and 8 months. It's a relatively small sample size, but that is a crazy low churn rate, especially when you consider that often our clients are just kicking off on individual projects, maybe not knowing if they're actually going to roll that retainer over into month 2, 3, 4, and so on. And in order to basically set yourself up for success, what I highly recommend doing is making sure that the first project you scope is relatively contained. If a client comes to you and they know exactly what they want, and it's this whale of a project, and you in the back of your head are like, okay, great, this is going to be a $20,000 build. There's a time and a place to just say yes and go for it. But at the same time, if we just scope that project down, we kind of break it out into contained chunks, and we just start with that first bit, what it will allow us to do is knock that thing out of the park, create a ton of value, either drive revenue or create a meaningful amount of operational leverage and time savings for our client. And that is going to set us up for everything that we do downstream. That big $20,000 project isn't going anywhere. Even if we decide to scope down and start with just a bite-sized 5K kind of contained build, once we accomplish that thing, it's the next thing is right around the corner.